Well, this is Emilio Ramos, preaching pastor of Heritage Grace Community Church. We are so blessed that you've decided to join us, watch our sermons, and watch our content here at heritagegrace.com and on Facebook. Just please remember, our sermons are here to bless you, but they are certainly not here to replace the preaching and the teaching from your local church. With that, if you've liked the material, the sermons, and the preaching here, be sure and like our Facebook page, share, and join us again. God bless you.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. As our slides here say, we are going to be studying and getting a look at the parable of the unrighteous steward. If you want to go ahead and turn to Luke 16, we will be studying verses 1 through 9 and following. Hopefully we get some time. We have some time at the end to really go into some application with the verses that follow. But in introduction, if you want to hit that slide, hopefully you can read this okay. In the introduction, actually, you know what we'll do first? We'll go ahead and read the text, and then we'll go into the introduction. Let me lay out the text for us here, starting in Luke 16, verse 1. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, for you can no longer be manager." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes." And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, "Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, "And how much do you owe?" And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." Pretty fascinating text. You can already tell, just even as we're reading it, a lot of questions are probably being raised, and even in your own mind as we read that. And hopefully this text will come out as clear as it really is once we kind of get into it. But in Luke 16, as many of you know these passages, Jesus is continuing his discourse. You remember, you can look at the phrase of the chapter, at the top of chapter 16, he was also saying to the disciples, which means this is part of the same discourse as the previous chapter when Jesus was giving a defense of his ministry to the scribes and Pharisees for why Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors. And so he also saying to his disciples, so Jesus continues the discourse and includes two parables about wealth, both of which shine light on the purpose of our wealth, the value of using your money well, using your money for the purposes, using your money for the glory of God. And almost 1/3, about 16 of roughly 40 parables in the Bible, 1/3 of those parables have something to say about money or deal directly with money. And that is to say that money is important. It's a part of everyday life experiences. Almost everything we do in life is done with money or cannot be done at all without money. And so Scripture has a lot to say about money, how to work for money, how to be wise with your money, how to use your money properly. So it goes so far as to say as what you do with your money, it demonstrates or it tells people a lot about who you are. What you do with your money says a lot about who you are. And so, next slide. Getting into the context here, You'll notice here, just in the first verse, he was also saying to the disciples. And so in this discourse, he shifts his attention to the disciples, which this marks the end, formally, the end of Jesus' response to the Pharisees. And this response, really all of Luke chapter 15, was a defense of his ministry. Jesus said, I have come to seek and save that which was lost. And he was defending that through the parables that he taught. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the prodigal son, or we could say the parable of the lost sons at the end of the day. And what's actually amazing is if you turn to the parable of the prodigal son, is that you'll see it has the most interesting makeup. The symmetry of the parable of the prodigal son, we didn't really get into much, but Jesus allots, or he lends almost the exact amount of space per character. There is 8 verses, and almost lines, and this is a literary device here that Jesus is using. There is exactly 8 verses or 8 lines, 8 stanzas that Jesus allots to the younger son, from verse 1 all the way to verse 19. This is when he was gone prior to his restoration. And then you have a couple of verses that deal with his reconciliation. When that's said and done, the older son is given another 8 stanzas. So there is some symmetry going on here between this. However, that symmetry is broken when the Bible does not record. Jesus does not finish the story. At least he doesn't give us an ending. How does the story end? He tells us how everything ends with the younger son, but how does it end with the older son? How does it end with the older son? Jesus really leaves us with a cliffhanger here. There's no ending. What is the point of the absence of the ending? Maybe we're just supposed to wait and see what's going to happen with the Pharisees. Will they accept Jesus' invitation into the kingdom of God? Or is the absence the point? That most of the leaders of the religious system were not going to experience reconciliation. They're going to experience the judgment of God. But Jesus leaves us at a cliffhanger here. But as we move from chapter 15 to chapter 16, it isn't as though Jesus is done with the Pharisees. He just more clearly or more directly gives the attention of the discussion. He directs it, the attention of it strictly or almost entirely to his disciples, with the intention that this message might overflow to the ears of the Pharisees, the legal experts, the scribes who were there. And I say that because at the end of this story, the Pharisees are frustrated. You go down to verse 14, where it says, "Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him." So Jesus is not done with the Pharisees. He's not done teaching without the intention of them understanding this or hearing this message, though he has turned his attention to his disciples. And something amazing that I want to point out here, especially in this verse, it says that the Pharisees who were lovers of money were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. That Greek word for scoffing is ekmukterizo. The word mukter is the word for nostril, and it refers to using your nose to ridicule someone, where we get the expression, even in the English, to look down your nose at someone. And this is exactly what the Pharisees are doing to Jesus. The same exact word is used in Psalm 2:4, where it says, "He who sits in the heavens laughs." And then 2:4b, so the second half of that verse, says, "The Lord scoffs at them." The Lord scoffs at them. The Lord ridicules them or mocks them. The King James Version says he holds them in derision. Holds them in derision, and that hold someone in derision or in contempt means to scoff at them, to ridicule them. And from the Latin, we have a word that is called ridiculum, which is where we get the word ridiculous. It means that something is laughable if it is ridiculous to us. And so even in that passage, you have God and his anointed mocking, scoffing at man for their schemes to try to separate themselves and to toss off the fetters and the sovereignty of God, to become autonomous, and God is scoffing at them. God finds it laughable that they are trying to scheme and trying to accomplish this autonomy. But here, instead of God and his anointed ridiculing man, man is now ridiculing God and his anointed, looking down their nose at him and scorning divine counsel, the very teachings of the anointed himself. And this is the height of man's sin, the height of man's folly, the height of man's arrogance. Because no one will get away with designating the wisdom of God as something that is laughable and worthy of ridicule. And this is what the Pharisees were doing to Jesus. What he was saying, they were looking down their nose at him and ridiculing divine wisdom. And so they have not lost his focus per se, but now he is turning the discourse to the ears of his disciples. And it's not so much a defense of his ministry anymore. He has formally ended his defense of his ministry, and now more so giving a lesson on discipleship. And so let's get in the text. Any questions? Any questions so far as we go forward? Okay, amen. Let's get into the text. Verse 1, chapter 16. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man. And he actually begins this parable and the next parable the exact same way. There was a rich man. There was a rich man. Even in the unrighteous steward and the rich man and Lazarus, a lot of Jesus' parables are started exactly the same way. Many of them, almost 6 of them, are started just like this, speaking about rich men or about money. There was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. Now we're able to get a feel as to how rich this man was because he was probably able to live at a distance from the operation that he had going on. He was able to be absent from everyday transactions of his business, which was actually a pretty common practice in Middle East. You could hire someone to take care of your estate while you could go and exercise a considerable amount of freedom to do whatever you wanted to do while someone ran your estate, while someone ran whatever kind of operations that you owned and that you had begun. And so if the master would have had an intimate knowledge of everyday business transactions and numbers, he wouldn't need anyone to tell him that his possessions were being squandered by the manager who was in charge. He wouldn't need someone to file a report that so much mismanaging was going on in his business, right? He was only aware that his possessions were being squandered once someone had come to him, once the accusation had reached his ears, and that is the Greek word diabolo, the word for accusation. Once that had reached his ears, and the manager here is caught embezzling, which he is either stealing, misappropriating funds that were put under his control. It specifically says here he was embezzling his master's possessions, squandering his master's possessions, wasting them. And we don't even know exactly what he did when it says that he was squandering his master's possessions. What was he supposed to do with the money? Was he supposed to invest it? Was he supposed to spend it with the best interest of the company in mind, and he failed to do that? Was it outright theft? It just doesn't tell us what exactly did he do. How did he misuse his master's possessions in such a way that the accusation is he squandered them? He wasted them. It's interesting that the word for squandered, diaskorizo, and it's the same word used of the prodigal son in the previous chapter in verse 13, where it says that he squandered his estate with loose living. And the older son actually goes in to fill in and give that some color. How did he squander his estate? Well, he went and he liquidated his estate and went and spent it all. And one of the things we know he did, he spent it all on prostitutes. If you look at the bottom of chapter 15, verse 30, he says, but when this son of yours, in amazement and shock, when this son of yours came who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. We're not exactly sure, but the word certainly denotes something scandalous, something pretty severe. Severe mismanagement was going on. Verse 2, and he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager. Now, this man was going to be fired, but he's basically given a 2 weeks notice before he would be fired. Give an account of your mismanagement, and then you're out of here. And it probably isn't the best work practice, business practice, because it places the company at a greater risk of something worse happening by an angry employee. And so he's given time to give an account of his mismanagement before he is let go. Verse 3, the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. And here Jesus allows us to eavesdrop into the manager's thoughts surrounding his own predicament here. The manager knew his days were numbered. The jig was up. His master was decided. Now the manager needs to make wise decisions which are in his own interest, that are going to benefit his future. What shall I do? What shall I do? And he ponders two unattractive alternatives: manual labor or becoming a beggar. First, in terms of digging, he said he wasn't strong enough. And I think that may be an excuse. I mean, sure, as a leader of a big company, he wasn't accustomed to getting his hands dirty. But more than that, he probably saw the labor of this line of manual labor as something that was beneath his dignity, something that was beneath his value. And so he shrugs it off. Secondly, it says he was too ashamed to beg for money and the necessities of life, the things that he would need, the things that beggars are asking for, the necessities of life. And I bet you his concern with that was, I am a CEO of a company, and do you know what begging would do to my social status, to my social standing? And so being unwilling to surrender to one of these alternatives, he dismisses them, and then comes his aha moment. Verse 4. And I want to make sure, okay, you're following over here. I told you I would forget that. I just keep going in these slides here. Verse 4, I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes. Right? Who are the people? The people that will welcome him into their homes? As we have seen, these are the debtors of his master, whom the manager knows, whom the manager has done business with previously. And in his mind, this move has the potential to change his future. After he's being fired, he thinks this is the scheme. This is the thing that's going to keep me on my feet after I am let go. What is the unrighteous manager going to do? What is the unrighteous manager going to do? What is your understanding of? I know we briefly read this text. The verses following, he says, and he's going to go, he says, and he summoned each one of his masters as debtors, verse 5, and he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. What exactly is he doing there? What do you think he's doing there? Definitely, that's right. He is going to take the contract. That is how, and he still possesses control of because he hasn't been fired. He's going to take the contract, he's going to meet with the debtors, and he's going to change the agreement. He's going to lower the debt of these debtors, right? How is he going to do that? He is going to change the amount that the debtors were obligated to pay, which is a lot of money. And we're going to look at that here in a second. And he's going to make them an accomplice in this agreement. An accomplice is just a partner in crime in changing and fixing these books. The debtors is these notes here of tampering with these contracts that were previously signed, in which the manager would achieve some kind of leverage over the debtors, and he would achieve personal obligation from them. If he could get them to go off and change these contracts, sign off, then he would make them obligated. He would make them obligated to be favorable to him once he was gone, once he was fired. He doesn't want to do manual labor. He doesn't want to be on the streets begging. He wants access into these people's homes and all that they possess. He wants to be welcomed where they live so that he doesn't have to be on the street, so that he doesn't have to be doing manual labor. He will have access to their homes. He'll have access to their stuff. And it's not just one. It's not just one house. The parable actually doesn't tell us how many debtors this happened to. But it says in verse 5, and he summoned each one of his master's debtors and began saying to the first. In verse 7 said, he said to another. We're just given two examples, but I guarantee you there's more than that. There's more debtors than that. There's the first, and then there's another, and this is what he said to each of them. Probably not too bright of a future if it was only two examples or only two debtors to the master. But certainly he was very rich, and he had a vast farming operation in which he had many contracts with different merchants. Really fascinating. So in verse 5 starts the scheme, and he started to get in these interviews, change these contracts, and he summoned each one of his masters as debtors and began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly. Doesn't that sound shady? Sit down quickly and write 50, right? Quickly take what you owe and cut it in half. I think this would have shocked the debtor for him to be brought into the person that he had owed a lot of money to, who was the representative of the master, this manager here. And he's saying, take what you owe, cut it in half. And I think that would have been shocking. I think that no doubt would have caused some discomfort, would have raised some alarm. And 100 measures of oil, how much oil is that exactly? 100 measures of oil, we're talking olive oil here. Olive oil would have been somewhere around 900 gallons of oil, equivalent to 3 years' wages of your average laborer. He cut those debts in half. Who's happy? The debtor is happy, but this would have brought severe losses to his master's company. And think, how many people did he do it to? How many people did we do it to? I mean, he basically cut in half what would have amounted to 3 years of labor, these wages that the average person would have gained. That's a lot of money over a lot of time. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? Verse 6, or verse 7, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. Here the manager reduces the debt by 20%. And 100 measures of wheat would have amounted would have been worth somewhere around 7 years of labor. So this probably was actually worth more than the oil. Would have been worth more than the olive oil. 100 measures of wheat versus 100 measures of oil, it would have been worth a lot more. And then comes a shocking response from the master of the estate. Are you ready? And his master, verse 8a, but by which I want to say, verse 8a, that first half of the verse, is the end of the parable. That is the end of the parable. There's two halves of this verse. Verse 8a is the end. Verse 8b, I know that it's not as clean as we usually like it, but that begins Jesus' commentary. That begins Jesus' commentary and his interpretation, and then flows the application right after that. But he says, and his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly, and then comes Jesus' commentary, for the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. They are more shrewd, they are more prudent, they are more wise, they are more crafty in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And you'll notice in verse 8, anybody have any questions so far? Everyone with me? The master is not praising the unethical, the unrighteous, the dishonest behavior of the manager. He is only acknowledging how those actions culminated. All those actions together, the climax of all of these actions, how they culminated into an elaborate scheme that would prop up and secure the manager's future once he was fired. After really looking at everything and seeing the climax of all of these different decisions and the elaborate scheme that he had concocted and put together, this intricate design, he says that was shrewd. That was crafty. That was surprising, shocking. And so it's not really whether or not it was proper misses the point, but whether or not it was prudent is really what we're talking about. The man made decisions that, in his opinion, would secure a more positive future than if he hadn't had done that in these decisions. And so what is Jesus doing? Jesus is using a bad example to teach us something valuable through, it's called a rabbinic pattern of reasoning. You argue from the lesser to the greater, from the bad example to the good example, from the bad to a better way of being shrewd, which is what Jesus is going to do here in the application. So, if the sons of this age are shrewd in preparing for a future that is going to come to an end, and this is Jesus' his argument from the lesser to the greater. If the sons of this age are more shrewd in preparing for a future that is going to come to an end, how much more shrewd or how much more prudent and diligent should Christians be in preparing for a future that will never end? That's really the argument that Jesus is getting at. And the ultimate message that he wants to get across, and we are certainly not being praised here. As you'll see, even in this verse, we are not being praised when he says that the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. Is that the people of this world, what Jesus is sharing is that the people of this world are more aggressive and wise in preparing for their temporal future than Christians are for their eternal future. That they are more concerned about a future that will end, and we are less concerned about a future that will never end. And that they are more concerned about a future that is far less significant than we are about a future that is infinitely more significant. And again, this is a parable. It turns into a parable on discipleship, how Christians should live. That we need to be more shrewd. We need to use the resources that we have better and more aggressively and more prudently, more shrewdly than the sons of this age. And the sons of this age means unbelievers, sons of darkness. They are not sons of God. Any thoughts on that? And the application. Verse 9 says, "And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." What does that mean? What does that verse mean? What do you think that means? It is a parallel verse to verse 4. You remember, this is where the aha moment really started for him. I know what I shall do, so that when I'm removed from the manager, people will welcome me into their homes. And here, Jesus is saying, this is what you should do, so that people will welcome you into eternal dwellings. What do you think it's saying? What do you think of the heart of this verse here? "And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." And I think one thing that might be difficult about kind of pinpointing the meaning of this verse is trying to grapple with some of the verbiage here. Make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness. What is that referring to? The wealth of unrighteousness, very simply, it doesn't seem simple kind of when you read that. It seems that it could mean many things. But the wealth of unrighteousness is an element of the fallen world and the age in which we live. So wealth is termed unrighteous because it belongs to an unrighteous system. It is associated with sin. It is associated with a fallen world order, and an order that is passing away. An order is that we live in the present evil age, Galatians 1:4 says. The present evil age, and Jesus says, the money of the age, the wealth of unrighteousness, use that money. Jesus would not be condoning, use the money you got from ill-gotten means, use the money that you received from unrighteousness to go and buy friends for heaven. But this is specifically, this wealth of unrighteousness is an element of our fallen world, and it is therefore associated with the present evil age in which it belongs. It is the wealth of unrighteousness. And you're called to be faithful. You'll see, actually, if you go down just a couple verses later, where it says in verse 11, "Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth," it's something you are to be faithful in using. The use of unrighteous wealth, "who will entrust the true riches to you?" And so really that is the best way to understand wealth of unrighteousness, is that it is associated with a fallen age, an unrighteous age, just like everything else under the sun here, an age that is passing away. Any questions on that? Is it making sense? Understand? Yes.
So is he saying basically like use the worldly currency to connect with people, or to get in with people?
Exactly. In order to bring them into the kingdom. In order to bring them into the kingdom. The aim is to take the money that we earn in this unrighteous age and purchase friends for heaven. That is the ultimate aim of this, to take the money that we earn, the money that we have, to invest it into kingdom enterprises. We need to use the money that we have for the salvation of souls to the glory of God. That is ultimately what we are to do with our money. Invested in kingdom resources, we need to place our money in gospel programs that are going to pay us eternal dividends. And we can reap the reward of sowing our money into these different into these different programs, and being a part of this, supporting ministries that reach lost souls. Pastors can preach and lead the flock only if they are supported. Missionaries can be sent so souls can be saved only if they are supported. Ligonier Ministries, Grace to You Ministries, even our own Red Grace Ministry, the local church, can be more effective at reaching the lost if they have the financial support that they need. And so the best thing about financially supporting the gospel is that you are going to reap the eternal benefit of what these ministries accomplish by grace. But the picture here is really an amazing picture, and I posted just a description, is that it is that there are souls by virtue of our money that we are investing in different gospel-centered, kingdom-driven ministries. Souls are preceding us, and this is the point. And this is the ultimate picture that is being painted here, is that we need to make friends for ourselves via our money. We need to invest our money so that gospel ministries might reach out, or so that we might, through tracts or whatever it is, that we send our money for the salvation of souls. That we spend our money for the salvation of souls. And the picture is that those souls precede us. We don't ever see their salvation. We won't know who comes to Jesus by the ministries that we invest our time in, whether it's Red Grace Media, whether it's in the local church, who we are reaching. But those who have invested their money will be welcomed by the souls of those who have been saved, who preceded them, and they will welcome you and will say, it was your money that enabled this ministry to reach my soul, to save me. And we are being welcomed into eternal dwellings because we invested our money, we used it more shrewdly, and we were storing up treasures in heaven by virtue of investing our money in kingdom enterprises. That makes sense? Ultimately, that is exactly what Jesus is teaching us. Exactly the message that Jesus wants to get across here. Go to the next slide. In Matthew, if you want to go ahead and turn, Matthew 6, 19 through 20. Are there any questions about that? I hope that comes out clear. Very powerful. Matthew 6, 19 through 21 says this: do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Did you know you have a glory account in heaven? You have a glory account in heaven that you can be storing up and placing treasure in now to enjoy once you get there. That's pretty amazing. Storing up treasure in heaven. And I think just in line with this verse, we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Where are we storing up treasure? Where are we storing up treasure? Where are you investing your money? What do you love most? Where is your heart? And this is what's implied in the verse. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If your treasure is on earth, right? If your treasure is either on earth or it's in heaven. Likewise, your heart is where your treasure is. If your heart is either on earth, your heart is in heaven. And so we don't want to be like the bad example of our prodigal. His treasure was on earth. Ultimately, he was concerned about his temporal future and not his eternal future. Why put all of our treasure in a land that is perishing? Why put all of our treasure in a place that we cannot enjoy it when we die. We can't take it with us. We can't enjoy it. It doesn't accumulate to our glory account. Eventually, the world and all that is in it, our lives, our money, they're all passing away, which is what it means that when it fails, here in our verse, it says, make friends for yourself by the means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, either when your money runs out or when you die and you can't use it. Ultimately, that is what this fallen world order is going to do. It's going to fail. It's going to pass away. And so we need to make the most of our time here spiritually. We must make most of our time here spiritually. We cannot be concerned about storing up treasure on earth when you only have so much time to live. And if your aim is to store up treasure here on earth, that won't translate into any kind of heavenly. If that's your aim, it won't translate to your account. It won't translate to your eternal reward. I was thinking about this, and I remember a quote by Amy Carmichael, a missionary. She said this: "We shall have all eternity to celebrate the victories, but we only have the few hours before sunset in which to win them." We only have so much time. We only have a finite and limited amount of time to win that which we are going to enjoy for all eternity. You don't have much time, brothers and sisters. You don't have much time. What are you doing with your time? What are you doing with your money? Because what you will be enjoying for all of eternity must be won right here in this finite period of time. It must be secured right here. Any thoughts on that? Shouldn't that motivate us, right? Right. That money is not in and of itself is bad, if you can't hear Brian. That's right. That's right. So at the end of the day, it's how we use our money. What is the mindset? You know, Jim Elliot, he was speaking about salvation, but I love the quote so much that I want to use it when speaking about sanctification. Even stewardship, when he says, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. So much truth there. And maybe we can just a couple more verses here, and then we're gonna end our service here and take a break. Verse 10 says this: "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much." If you're faithful in the little, that's an indicator of what you will do when you have a lot. You will be faithful with much. And he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. Are we faithful with the wealth that we have? With the wealth that has been entrusted to us? Because what you do with the little is an indicator or demonstrates what you will do with much. Some people say, well, if I only had more, I would do this, I would do X, Y, and Z with it. No, you wouldn't. Because the Bible says if you're unrighteous in a little, you're going to be unrighteous in much. If you're unrighteous in little, you're going to be unrighteous in much as well. Therefore, verse 11, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust the true riches to you? Will God reward the unfaithful? Will God reward us if we are unfaithful in the use of unrighteous wealth? And lastly, verse 12. And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, I mean, some of you might be thinking, when am I unfaithful in the use of that which is another's? I mean, all that we deal with in life is that which is another's. All that we deal with in life, all that we handle is, and I'm speaking primarily of God. All that we have is God's. And so even speaking to unbelievers here as well, and as believers, God has entrusted humanity. God has entrusted much to believers and unbelievers, and you will have to give an account for everything that you have done. You will be held responsible for the resources that you're given. What did you do with your life that God gave you? What did you do with your life? You will have to give an account because God, whose image you bear, is going to hold you responsible to give an account on that day. What did you do with what God entrusted to you? God has made us stewards of things that belong to Him. And that's interesting. It's like if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? And ultimately what that means is we usually honor and respect the property of others. We usually honor and respect it more than our own. You take care of it a little differently maybe than if it was your own possessions. You may not care as much. You may not have as much as a careful attitude. But with someone else's possessions, you usually do. But if we don't respect the property of others, we certainly won't take care of and care for that which we have been given. And so this is a lesson on discipleship and the need for us to be careful with, to safeguard what we have been entrusted with, especially in the realm of our money. How are we using our money? Are we zealous for souls to meet us? So that we can say all of our resources, our money, and this is not beside even what we do in our homes. Those are all kingdom endeavors. The food you put on your table, the clothes you put on your back, everything, the rent that you pay, all of that is kingdom. None of that is pagan. None of that is insignificant. All of that is kingdom living, and all of that is going to be rewarded. But how faithful are you in your use of the wealth of unrighteousness? Amen? Amen. Well, let's take a break and we'll come back in here shortly. Thank you.
Well, this is Emilio Ramos, preaching pastor of Heritage Grace Community Church. We are so blessed that you've decided to join us, watch our sermons, and watch our content here at heritagegrace.com and on Facebook. Just please remember, our sermons are here to bless you, but they are certainly not here to replace the preaching and the teaching from your local church. With that, if you've liked the material, the sermons, and the preaching here, be sure and like our Facebook page, share, and join us again. God bless you.